All writers start out making the same kinds of mistakes. Yet, when we're beginners, we don't know that these are the typical beginner mistakes. Our work sounds good to us, right? We don't know any better. Later on, we learn enough to realize that what we've been doing that we thought was pretty good is actually full of these beginner mistakes. The work that sounded perfectly fine to us and that we thought was so good is now, in our judgment, not that good. Even when we do learn how to write better, it still feels like an enormous amount of effort and attention is required to write well. It all turns out to be a lot more work than we expect. At that point, we begin to wonder, when is this going to get easy? Will we ever be able to just sit down and write without having to be so vigilant all the time? Someday, if we stick with it and we do the work, we will discover that it does get easier. I'm not saying that there's no work involved, but a certain level of fluency has been achieved. So, what I've just described are the four stages of learning that every writer goes through. I've gone through them. Your favorite authors have gone through them. It's possible that you are going through them right now. We all go through it. This is how we all learn. And that is our topic today. My wish for you is that knowing these four stages of learning will make your journey toward becoming a better writer, maybe not easy, but more peaceful and predictable. So, before we get started with the four stages of learning as they pertain to learning to write good fiction, let me introduce myself in case you're new to this channel. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. I'm best known as the author of middle grade fiction, which is children's literature targeted to the 8 to 12-year-old reader, in case you're wondering what middle grade fiction is. I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own platform for teaching and mentoring writers. I invite you to visit the website to download a freebie that I have for you. It's a collection of 30 writing prompts that are designed according to story structure. And if you download them, I think that you will find that not only do you have some fun writing prompts to play with, but you will get a little crash course in what we mean by story structure, beginning, middle, and end, all that good stuff. I'll post the link in the description box. And of course, if you're not already a subscriber to this YouTube channel, I hope you will subscribe today. So let's dive into this topic of how writers learn. And I want to be honest with you. Learning is fun. It's one of those things that we love to tell the kids, right? Learning new things can be fun, but learning also means change. When we learn how to do something, we are changing our level of expertise, we're changing our approach to it. And change is, for most of us, most of the time, not easy. It inspires resistance. It leaves us feeling unmoored for a little while as we transition from an old way of doing things to a new way of doing things. So, in that sense, learning is fun, but also can be difficult. So, bear that in mind. So, this idea that we can call the four stages of learning, it's also referred to as the hierarchy of competence. This is not my invention. I want to be clear about that. This concept dates back to the 1960s. It was an idea developed by some academics and management professionals to serve as a kind of psychological model of how people learn. So it was not developed to describe specifically what it feels like to learn to write good fiction. It's about how all humans learn to do anything, whether it's to speak another language or to learn to drive a car or play a musical instrument, all the things that people learn how to do. But we're here to talk about learning how to write good fiction. And in my experience as a writer, as a teacher, as a mentor as well, these four stages are an exact representation of what happens when writers embark on a process of development. None of us are exempt from this process. Okay. I just want you to know we're all in this together. And in today's video, I'm going to focus on what these four stages look like for fiction writers. Okay. So there's more to learn about these stages that I'm going to describe today. We're focusing on the writer's experience. Are you ready? Stage one is called unconscious incompetence. Oh, what a challenging word, incompetence, right? It sounds very critical. So let's just, first of all, put our feelings down about it a little bit because unconscious incompetence is where we all start. A simpler, more colloquial way of saying it maybe is when you start out, you don't know what you don't know. You are unconscious of your level of competence, and your level of competence is quite low. And you just don't realize it because you don't know. So, what does this look like for a writer? So, beginning writers write stuff that is beginner work. Now, that seems self evident, but beginner writers tend not to know that what they're writing is beginner work because what they're writing sounds okay to them. It's it suits their ear, it suits their level of, discernment about what good writing is. They tend to, judge the quality of the writing by the quality of how they feel when they're writing. If they feel good, they're having a good time, the words are flowing, they assume that what is coming out is not bad, right? These writers who are beginners and who are in the stage one of unconscious incompetence obviously tend to discount the idea that they need training because they feel what they're doing is pretty good. It felt good to write. They're proud of themselves for writing something, and they should be. That's like a big accomplishment. We can't get started without starting, right? Everyone's a beginner when they begin. Now, we live in an interesting publishing landscape nowadays because we have sort of in recent years, the opportunity for beginners to independently publish their work. And I am a big fan of independent publishing as an option for writers, but I just want to throw a little caveat out there that what can happen to a stage one writer who's in the state of unconscious incompetence, having a good time writing, is that they will get maybe, part way through their first draft of their first novel and start to think about, oh, cool, I'm having such a good time writing this. I can't wait to publish it. So they immediately sort of skip ahead into the what do I do to get this published? I just want to say call it a hot take. I don't care. This is my opinion. These writers are doing themselves a disservice by skipping so many steps. Sometimes they put a lot of time and effort and sometimes invest money in self publishing a piece of beginner work. And they're setting themselves up for disappointment, obviously, because it's not going to get the good response that they want. They won't understand why. They may tend to blame forces outside their control, and there also, can be some consequences to this. One of the consequences that comes across my desk sometimes is somebody who self-published something that was clearly not ready. Later on in their development as writers, they begin to understand that they were being naive, that they were in stage one. Now they know better. They really like that early premise. They want to revisit it, rewrite it according to their new level of expertise, but it's already been published. They were the ones that published it, true, but the fact that it's been published kind of limits their options for what they can now do with it. So the rush to publish beginner work in a fit of enthusiasm, in, naivete is not a crime, but it does potentially have negative consequences for the writer who's going to continue that journey of development. So I just want to put that out there. So let me just say again, there's no shame in being a beginner. There's literally no other way to start. The big challenge of stage one, how we might get out of stage one, involves accepting that you have something to learn and that what sounds good to you when you're a beginner, chances are it's beginner work. It is where you start, but it's not where you should strive to end up. Now, what gets in a writer's way and keeps them stuck in stage one? If their ego doesn't want to admit that they have something to learn, if they're ashamed, in a sense, embarrassed to discover whether or not their work is worthy of being read or not, they may be, and I've had this come across my desk as well, the writer who admits they just have a fundamental mistrust of authority figures and they don't like hearing other people's opinions. They're not comfortable with the idea of submitting their work for evaluation by others. It's very emotionally difficult for them to do that. These feelings can definitely get in our way. Feelings can be very difficult. Some writers who are in stage one and have resistance to waking up to the fact that there's room to grow hide in a kind of idea that it's just a hobby, that they're doing it for themselves, they're just having fun writing. And again, I want to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what I often see is that the writer is saying that, but that's not all of what they mean. That I'm just doing it for me. It doesn't matter hides a wish to be really good, to have maybe be recognized as a good writer, to be published, to have readers, to have a career. So, if you're saying I'm doing this for me, and so I'm not going to bother to get training, and it doesn't matter if I'm any good or not, it's fine. But just ask yourself if that's what you really mean. Okay. So, if you want to develop as a writer, you do need to wake up. You need to get out of the unconscious incompetence. And if you make it through the awakening, you get to arrive at stage two, which is called conscious incompetence. This is just as painful as it sounds, I'm afraid. Conscious incompetence is when you know that you don't really know what you're doing, but you don't know what to do just yet. I'm sure you've heard the expression, ignorance is bliss. In a way, it is that ignorance is bliss kind of describes stage one when we are unconscious of our incompetence and just having a great time scribbling away. But as soon as we know that our work is beginner work, we can feel kind of bad about it. That being aware of your own incompetence is not bliss. It's not the bliss of ignorance. It can be hard. It can feel humbling. And you can quickly know just enough about good writing if you start to take up a journey of training and education and development to look back at that early work that you were so excited about and really go, I can't believe I made people read this. Now you can sort of see it in all its flaws. One of the great mentors in my writing life was the wonderful, brilliant, and much missed composer lyricist for the musical theater, Stephen Sondheim. And people ask Sondheim if he ever thought about going back and revising his early work. And he had the best answer. So I'm just going to share it here. He said, that would be like revising my baby pictures. Like, that's what I did at the time. Don't judge your baby pictures. You were a baby. You did the best you could at the time. So, what can be really challenging during stage two, this period of conscious incompetence, when you're aware, painfully aware of the flaws in your own work as it currently stands? If you have issues with perfectionism, if you get very upset with, seeing your own work is not perfect yet, if that triggers difficulty in you, it's going to make this stage hard for you. If receiving feedback is very painful for you, if you really don't like hearing criticism, this is going to be tough because honestly, there's no way to get through stage two without hearing some feedback, doing some learning, and trying new ways of approaching your work that are going to feel clumsy and awkward at first. If you don't trust your ability to learn, if you had a bad time at school, if being a student was painful for you, if it brings back difficult feelings, this is also going to be a real struggle for you. And I say this not to discourage you, but to put you on alert that if these are the things that come up while you are in stage two, make friends with them. My dear storytellers, it's okay. It's okay to find feedback painful. It's okay to have flashbacks of being in the third grade and failing the spelling bee. It's okay to like say, oh gosh, my perfectionism is really giving me a problem with the process of learning. You've got to make friends with your resistance in order to make progress, right? You can't quit because then there's no more progress. So having a little wrestle with these forces of resistance, these little gremlins is necessary. I guess what I want you to remember is that everybody does go through this awkward period of wishing that we could somehow skip the learning process. But there is no way out but through. You've got to study, you've got to practice, and you've got to keep writing, and you've got to write quite a bit. And what you write is probably going to disappoint you for a while. Why? Because you're learning, you're in stage two. The conscious incompetence phase is when you can see the flaws of your own work and you are working on developing it. So if if you want to know some pitfalls that can come up because of these forms of resistance, maybe you'll resist getting training. Maybe you just really will have a hard time committing to getting some training. Maybe you will get training or act like you're getting training, but you're not gonna practice. This is the very familiar situation of the writer who attends a lot of seminars or goes to workshops or reads a lot of craft books, but never actually changes anything in their own writing. So you're learning in a theoretical fashion, but you're not putting anything into practice. That's faking it. That's not really grappling with the discomfort of stage 2, okay? The last pitfall that I wanna point out is seeking out training that doesn't make you uncomfortable, and I wanna explain what I mean by that. I once had another mentor, a great friend of mine who's a yoga teacher, and she once said to her yoga class as we struggled with what she was asking us to do, "If you like the pose, you're probably not doing it right." What she wanted us to understand and quite succinctly is that if we're trying to do something new, it's going to make us uncomfortable. If we're stretching our capacity, it's going to feel like a stretch. Writing good fiction is a pretty technical thing, and it is aimed not at making the writer happy, but at making the reader's experience exactly what we want it to be. Now, you may get a lot of joy and pleasure and happiness out of being a writer and out of the creative process. But if you continually prefer training protocols that are focused on your own satisfaction, on making you feel um, loose and creative and relaxed, I mean, all that stuff is good. It's very restorative. It's a really great way to press the reset button. But if you are nurturing the flame of your own creative process at the expense of really getting technical instruction on how to make a book that works for the reader, you haven't found all the training you need. You're hanging out on the sunny side of the street. And that's fine if you feel like you need sun, but you also need technique. And technique is going to feel unnatural. It is going to ask you to change what you want to do intuitively. So it's going to make you uncomfortable. That kind of training is important too. Now, if you manage to get some really good training, you hang on through the confusion of discomfort, you implement what you're learning, you actually put it into practice. Even if it seems totally counterintuitive at first, guess what's going to happen? Very soon, you're going to arrive at stage 3, which is conscious competence. Now, this is a really interesting stage, and uh, writers who get to this stage are also going to spend a lot of time in it. This is where you actually have learned how to improve your writing. You've learned what to do better, but it takes so much concentration to actually do it. Because you now have a lot of technique that you didn't have before, you find yourself having to think really hard about every little thing every time you sit down to work. It's exhausting, right? It's constant concentration. You're probably working pretty slowly. You're probably revising a ton, and it can get frustrating. Why is it so frustrating? Because if you stop concentrating, like for a minute, it is very easy at this stage to just slip back into your old habitual way of doing things. And that's going to happen. I'm here to tell you it's inevitable that that will happen. And then you'll catch yourself and then you'll get mad at yourself because you thought you knew better by now. You put so much work into training and Yet there's that old mistake again, that old thing that you've corrected in your drafts a million times. Listen, if this is you, I want you to give yourself a huge pat on the back because if you have done the work of becoming conscious of all the little technical things that go into writing really good fiction, you are way ahead of the pack. You have likely become that person that gives other writers fantastic notes. People probably ask you for notes all the time now because you're so well informed. You're used to really concentrating on technique, right? You can spot these mistakes a mile away in other people's work. You still have to be very intentional, very careful when implementing them in your own work. This is normal. We all tend to give better notes to others than we give to ourselves. That's just the way it always is. So, what do you do now? You're in this stage of conscious competence. You're concentrating, you're thinking, you're working. How do you move on to the next stage? You basically need to hang on and you need to practice and you need to trust this fact. You will become fluent in time, but only if you put in the hours of really doing it. You've got to keep doing it. This is really where the magic happens, is when you're in this conscious competence phase and you're concentrating all the time, putting into practice what you learned, checking your notes, putting little reminder post-it notes everywhere to remind you of the things that you tend to fall back into if you're not careful. Yes, it's a lot of work. Feedback can be very helpful in this stage as well to help keep us honest. And if we let other people's eyes on our work who also have conscious competence, we are in a very lucky position. Now, I want to throw in a little warning here. If we need feedback or we want feedback, and we allow people to give us notes who are not yet at the stage of conscious competence. They may be at an earlier stage. They don't have the technical training that we've had. We have to be really careful because if they give us notes from their state of unconscious incompetence or conscious incompetence, it can be a little bit like the sirens calling us to the rocks. A lot of our hard won technique might sound wrong to those people. It's not because they have bad intentions, but they're just still in a different state of discernment. And their beginner impulses are going to want to advise us to go back to our untrained impulses. And if we don't have the courage of our convictions, this can be a shaky moment for us. So be discerning about where you get your feedback when you're in stage 3. I just want to say in the Path of the Storyteller program, where I teach and mentor writers through that training process, we have a membership for people who finish the program, and it's called Storyteller Circle. And when I created this membership, I thought to myself, I really am only going to let people join it if they have completed the Path of the Storyteller program, because I was very aware that if I mix writers who have not yet had a complete training and technique with writers who have really worked hard to earn this level of conscious competence, we're going to have a struggle between the beginner impulses and the trained impulses. The beginners are going to be much more confident in a way than the folks who have been trained because the trained folks are still like concentrating on every technique and thinking so hard about what they've learned. Whereas the beginners are like have the confidence of naivete, right? The ignorance is bliss thing. So you have to finish the Path of the Storyteller program to get into Storyteller Circle. And I have to say, and because of that restriction, it's an absolutely wonderful community. They're all rock stars and giving each other notes, really well-informed notes. Conscious competence is actually required to give good notes to other writers. So that's just a little perk that you get for doing the work. All right. What happens if you do the work? You stick with it. You put in the time. Stage 4 is unconscious competence. In other words, you are now competent and you don't have to concentrate so hard all the time. You can do it unconsciously, not sound asleep, but you've integrated the new learning. You have achieved fluency with it. You're not looking everything up all the time, right? It's become part of the way you think. Now, one characteristic of the stage 4 level is that the skill that you've achieved this kind of fluency with, this unconscious competence, starts to feel a little automatic, which means that you can do other things at the same time. If you achieve fluency in a second language, say, you can speak in this fluently in the second language without having to stop and look things up. And you can take a walk and carry on a conversation at the same time. If you learn to drive, at first you're thinking about everything, but after you've put into practice, yes, you can carry on a conversation and drive at the same time, right? So I hope that makes sense. How does this apply to writers? Am I implying that the writer who's put in the work and has stage 4 level competence can say, watch Netflix shows and write a great novel at the same time? No, I'm not suggesting that. If you can do that, my hat is off to you. I certainly cannot. But what it does mean is that you can think about more than one aspect of writing fiction at the same time. So in the previous stage, right, you are typically dealing with one thing at a time. This is why there's so much revision involved, because you might have to do one revision just to fix the plot. You might do another revision just concentrating on voice. You might do another description just polishing the dialogue. It's just really hard to think about multiple technical things at once when you are still in the stage 3 of conscious competence. Yes, you have competence, but only if you really concentrate, right? Once you're fluent, you can work a little more efficiently. What does that mean? You can maybe bash out the plot in a draft while also experimenting with voice. You might be able to draft a scene that has 10 different characters in it, having a very complex multi voice conversation, writing all that dialogue while also keeping a solid command of point of view, right? So you might have enough technical fluency that a few different aspects of writing fiction can be addressed simultaneously. And this will be true in revision as well, right? Do you still revise? Of course. You will always revise at every level of competence. But if you have stage 4 level of competence, this unconscious competence, you're going to catch yourself quicker if you are going down a blind alley, say, while you're drafting. So your process might become more efficient. You're still going to be challenged because writing fiction is hard, but the challenges may change. Earlier in your development, you might really worry whether you have the technical chops to finish something, right? You might be intimidated by story structure to the point where you're like, "Oh, I'm just hoping I can finish." Maybe when you finished a bunch of books, you're not gonna worry about your ability to finish, but you might start to worry about the quality of your work in a different way. You might raise your standards and aim higher because you're not bogged down in that intense concentration of just getting the technical things correct. You might decide to take on more technically ambitious projects, right? Things that have more experimental structures or require more research. You're gonna up your game to keep challenging yourself. It's just, I think, one of the things that comes with fluency. You're gonna want to keep challenging yourself. This is basically what we mean by mastery. Now you know how to do it. You still have to do the work, but you know how to do it. I hope that even at this stage, you will still be curious about how to improve because that's what keeps it fun and interesting and fresh all the time. But you're going to be operating from a baseline of fluency, and that's what makes further ambition and experimentation possible. So, I want to say one thing before I wrap up this talk. There is no guarantee that you are going to move from one stage to the next. It's not an automatic process. You have to do it. It takes intention. Whether that intention is a willingness to wake up to your beginner mistakes, a willingness to find training that challenges you and gives you the technique that you really need, a willingness to hang out in the discomfort of the stage when you're conscious of your incompetence, to concentrate, to practice, to put in the time to do the work. Now, my hope is that if you understand what this process feels like and what it feels like for everyone, that you won't be so inclined to misread some of the challenges that are inherent in this process of learning as signals to quit. They're signals that you're moving from one stage to another. They might be signals that you're moving through one of these stages. I don't want you to feel frustrated or stuck. I want you to have awareness that, oh, I'm in stage 2 now. Like these are the struggles of stage 2. Or, maybe you're in stage 3 and you have to concentrate about every little thing. And it feels like, well, I shouldn't have to work this hard. But if you can tell yourself, hey, this is the work of this stage of learning. And if I hang with it, I know it's going to get easier. That might keep you in the game. All right. You also might find it easier to receive feedback on your work because you will know that this is not personal. Everybody gets feedback and everybody feels uncomfortable about it, and it is of value, right? So it's not personal. Feedback is there to help you. I hope you also might have a more realistic sense of the time that it takes not only to bring one book to completion, but to bring your career to the point where you are a writer who is truly ready to publish something. Your work is ready for the reader. You've achieved that level of competence. Um, I also want to say that even at the fourth level, where you've integrated your expertise into a sense of mastery and feel that you've got some writing chops that are pretty reliable, even writers of that experience level, even pros, will always find tremendous value in working with good editors. It's not that we ever really outgrow the need for other eyes on our work, for getting feedback. We have to be discerning about where this feedback comes from, of course, as I said earlier. But writing good fiction is a complicated task. And if we want to achieve our full potential as creative artists, we really need to keep that growth mindset open, our whole careers. We need to be open for feedback, open to learning, willing to challenge ourselves at every step of the way. So please remember, we are all in this together. Okay. Wherever you are on the path, I want you to hang in there because you are doing great. That's what I have for you today. I hope this talk gives you something to think about. I hope it makes you feel encouraged. If you have questions about any of the things that I've shared today, please leave them in the comments below so I can answer. If you're interested in downloading that freebie collection of 30 writing prompts, you can check out the description box below. The link is down. Storyteller website and get them. And I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel so that you will get notified when the next video drops. Okay, I'll see you again soon. And until then, happy writing.